others, Britain's one-time enemy was now her greatest friend. Between them, Mary France and Britannia ruled the waves. In their own opinions, in truth, each ruled them just that little bit more than the other, but never mind. And who could rule them better than a sailor king? Hadn't King George V been a naval man all his life, ruling even his household with a discipline all shipshape? And with the King and Queen Mary, isn't that young Prince Albert, fresh out of Dartmouth himself? Yes, ruling the waves was Britain's business, and let no one dare think otherwise. On land, she had her moments too. Hadn't it been Lord Roberts who had shown the Boers what was what? An old man now, with only a few weeks left to live. I suppose it was his age that made him keep harping on warnings of war, or just a bee in an old man's bonnet. Of course, Europe would feel better if those Germans drumbeat a little less. Queen Victoria was always putting her German grandson into his place. But now Victoria was dead, and Wilhelm, the all-highest, was as ambitious as ever. But then, these foreign monarchs always were show-offs. Proud, proud Habsburgs of Austria. And all those other crowned heads in Serbia, Romania, Bulgaria, Italy, not to mention Spain and Portugal. Europe was thick with them, and the pomp and exhibitionism of it all. Perhaps the most proud was he who held sway over so many millions of miles of the Earth's surface. Nicholas, Tsar of all the Russia. Nicholas, proud, vain, and not very bright, but all the same to British eyes a gentleman, for how like their own King George he looked. Look further east and you find Japan, so recently become a factor in the world. Stole all our battleship designs, so they said. But one mustn't speak ill of one's new allies. But really, well, you know what I mean. Then, amid the minarets and mosques of Constantinople, the Turks, the young Turks they called themselves now, and which way would they jump if the balloon went up? One would like to know. How right it seemed to be born British. British, on an island and away from it all. British and enjoying such a beautiful summer. Grey toppers, smart turnouts, a summer in which to see and be seen. I hear young Lord so-and-so is engaged to the Honourable Priscilla, what's her name? Quite the loveliest thing at Ascot this season. Did you find time to read your paper this morning? No, I suppose not. It's about the Archduke of Austria and his wife. It seems they were out driving through the streets of this place, Sarajevo in Bosnia, and somebody in the crowd shot them both. Swat that wasp, Bertie, it's on the jam. Assassinations, political intrigues, for peace-loving, easy-going Britain, such things were not quite cricket. Messy and unconstitutional. Like all these suffragette votes for women nonsense. Europe in 1914. In the vineyards of the Moselle, along the Meuse and in Champagne, they said it would be a year of excellent vintage. Little rain on the vine, grapes small but concentrated in strength. Yes, when it came to the reckoning, 1914 would mean something on a bottle. But when the hours were too short for the work there was to do, what a nuisance that so many were called to the colours. In Paris, the glint of swords and brass and much talk of war along the boulevards. The stations packed with reservists leaving their families to join their distant units. Of course, France had conscription. In Britain, we'll go when we feel we should, not before. In Britain, we're free. For us, only volunteer armies. Hysteria in Paris, they say. Vive la France, on to Berlin, smash up German shops and send their owners back to where they came from, or put them behind bars. Still, there's a lot of rather good things in those German shops. Comforting to know we've got the fleet. Already at battle stations, they tell me. French marching, Serbs marching, Russians marching. Onward, Christian soldiers marching on to war. Marching on to where? Where? Where do flies march to in the winter time? Great excitement in London today, dear. No one seems to know what's up. Lots of Germans trying to get home. I can't blame them. But a bit panicky, don't you think? Meanwhile, in Berlin, from the Kaiser's balcony, his family looked down on forward to Paris, down with France. Germans marching, Austrians marching, onward Christian soldiers. Different uniforms, different flags, but the same purpose, to fight for civilization as each saw it. All over the world, the armament manufacturers rubbed their hands and applauded the progress of civilization as they saw it. Oh dear, the Kaiser's marched into Belgium. That's done it. King Albert and his army are putting up a good show. Brave little Belgium. We've got to stand by them. I'm afraid it's it, dear. London's mad with excitement now. People rushing to join up. No, they wouldn't be wanting me. My sales job's much too important. Anyway, it's not going to last all that long. Over by Christmas, they say at the office, and they're right. They've stopped Kitchener going back from Britain to his job in Egypt. Brought him right back from the boat, made him Secretary of State for War. Good thing, too. KK's the man we want at a time like this. On the whole, Prime Minister Asquith's got some good people around him. Churchill at the Admiralty, and Lloyd George. He'll be well in the forefront. But I wonder whether this is really a time for liberals. So then it started. Down with demon drink. We demand prohibition in Britain for the duration of the crisis. Such was the start of clauses in a Defense of the Realm Act. DORA, we called it. Striking at the very heart of an Englishman's freedom. Clauses forbidding you to buy your friend a drink. Clauses shutting the doors at certain hours. Clauses, many of them for some inexplicable reason, still unrepealed today. Time, gentlemen, please. After all, beer to the British was life itself. Listen to what Gus Elan was singing on the halls.
Now for breakfast I never think of having tea. I like me of a pint of ale. For dinner I likes a little bit of meat and half a pint of ale. For tea I likes a little bit of fish and half a pint of ale. And for supper I likes a crust of bread and cheese and a barrel and an half of ale. I likes a little bit of fish and half a pint of ale. And for supper I likes a crust of bread and cheese and a barrel and a half of ale.
1914. Britain is an island, and that has always made her different, alone, and secure. All the same, 1914 saw some pretty fast trench digging along the coasts. As people remarked, anybody would think the Kaiser was going to invade. Different, alone, and secure. Yet, not for the first time in history, and not for the last, Britain sent her best to fight Europe's battles overseas. Within hours, the British Expeditionary Force was on its way. The BEF, later to be called the Old Contemptibles, from a derogatory remark thrown out by the Kaiser himself. Off they went. To what? Another brush with the Boers. Such had been the nature of wars to date. Certainly none of them realized that they were to be the first in the greatest human sacrifice in history. And even as they went, others rushed to follow, needing little encouragement from the recruiting officers. Soon the doors would have to be closed, and unable to accept all those fearful that, whatever it was, it would indeed be over by Christmas, and they would have missed it. Meanwhile, in London and the big cities, life went on pretty much as normal. Wars had always been something over there, fought by a few and criticized by the armchair multitude. And this was just another war. Business and pleasure as usual, except for some odd reason, you couldn't get on a number 15 for love or money. Disgraceful. Where do all the buses go in the winter time? Well, there they were, trundling not London streets, but the long poplar-lined roads of France and Belgium. Plenty of room on top. Another along in a minute. Bonjour, mademoiselle from Armentières. Inky pinky parlez-vous. We're here because we're here. Meanwhile, under the direction of old Papa Joffre, another and greater army moved towards the oncoming enemy. The massive white oxen of France pulled other things than harvest carts that season. Already on the long eastern front, the first contact. The Russian commander-in-chief, Duke Nicholas, was on the move into East Prussia, confident of the future. Already in Galicia, there were thousands of Austrian prisoners to send behind the Russian lines. An ill-prepared and ill-timed advance on the enemy's part had resulted in disaster. Not for these Austrians the cold and misery, mud and horror of the long winter campaigns yet to come. Yes, Herr Officer, that is the position of my unit. Thank you, Herr Officer. Much of the world was off to war. The British, the Germans, the French, the Austrians, the Belgians, even the Japanese. But what of potentially the greatest power on earth? In Washington, President Wilson had declared for strict neutrality. "I don't want my son to be a soldier," was America's popular song of autumn 1914. But what of it when Britain herself was only half at war? At the garden parties there were complaints about soldiers jostling the civilians. Of course, it's for charity, dear, and it's in a good cause. No cricket at London's Oval neither, only the army. No play at the Oval, no play in Belgium. Only destruction and streams of refugees. The old, old story of Europe. The Belgian army and its king fell back through Ghent and back still further until only a fraction of tiny Belgium remained Belgian. Already the Germans were marching into Brussels and beating at the doors of Antwerp, intent on knocking out Belgium to get at the real enemy, France. Belgium was only the stepping stone. Let loose the dogs of war, but spare the dogs of peace. At the great English country houses, the hunts met as usual. Old habits die hard, and the habit of a Britain undisturbed was the oldest habit of all. Our brave boys have always kept her that way. Wonder how they're getting on today. The brave boys were outside a little Belgian town called Mons, in a thin, thin line, facing a grey flood that never seemed to ebb, never seemed to lack reinforcement. Cut them down like the corn they trod, and more appeared behind them. There at Mons died complacent Victorian and Edwardian England, died with the best of its flower. This was war as nobody had known it before. A flood it was, grey in colour, sweeping on, and nothing, it seems, could ever stem it. West, southwest, south, onwards it poured. Out from Paris came the taxicabs, their fares reinforcement for the wavering French line. Paris was threatened. All France was threatened. 1870 had brought Sedan and the greatest defeat in France's history. The same enemy, but Sedan must never be allowed to happen again. And so began the first of the battles of the rivers, those beautiful, stately fishing rivers of France. Rivers like the Aisne, the Somme, and the Marne. At Compiègne, Joffre impatiently paced out the minutes before the arrival of a special train bringing Lord Kitchener. The Allies were facing a crisis. And in time of crisis, the best thing the British Secretary of War could do was to go and see for himself. And what the Allied command saw was nothing short of a miracle. At the slow waters of the Marne, the grey flood stopped, hesitated, wavered, and then ebbed at last. Forward went the French to the Aisne, and to their rear went the first mass of German prisoners. The Marne, a key battle in history, was over. Germany was defeated, but it was to take 4 years of marching and fighting to prove it to her. Meanwhile, down from Mons retreated the BEF, tired, battle-worn, but still miraculously one fighting force. Turn and dig in, and then out of the earth of France and Belgium emerged the true pattern of the Great War, a pattern of trenches, duckboards, and barbed wire. From the North Sea to Switzerland, then from Switzerland to Venice, and from Venice to Baghdad. A line of men like moles. Summer to autumn. In London, the first overcoats appear. The odds of over by Christmas lengthen. Already in Petrograd, the first snows have fallen. Petrograd, renamed from St. Petersburg to remove any possible German tinge. Winter comes to Russia. That winter that has in history so many times proved Russia's greatest ally. Along the long eastern battlefront, the Cossacks ride out to harass and haunt German and Austrian alike. Men and horses the same as those that once beat Napoleon. Up in the high, snow-bound Caucasus, a new foe had entered the lists and failed. In the passes, the Russian artillery hastens the retreat of a Turkish army beaten in its first baptism of fire. Hundreds of frost-bitten prisoners bear witness of the failure of the Young Turks to bring new glory to a great but fading empire. Winter in Russia, and winter too on the Western Front. The first snow falls in the high Vosges, where the French battle to regain their lost province of Alsace. Winter at the broken bridges across those beautiful, stately rivers. Winter brushing its first dustings of white on Europe's new and terrible landscapes, on the rubble and charred wood that once were towns, villages, and homes. A new backdrop for the greatest drama in history, destined to run for 4 years with a cast of millions. The tragedy of an age. Cold along the dunes near the North Sea. Cold in Flanders, in Picardy, and in Lorraine. 1914 certainly meant something, and not just on a bottle. And then it was Christmas, and it wasn't over, and wouldn't be over for many a Christmas yet to come. Christmas in France, Belgium, Germany, and what was still called Holy Russia. No stir of wings sweeps softly by, no angel comes with blinding light. Beneath the wild and wintry sky, no shepherds watch their flocks tonight. In the dull thunder of the wind, we hear the cruel guns afar. But in the glowering heavens, we find no guiding, solitary star. But being Christmas, at least there were presents. Little comforts that made all the difference to those in the line, to those who first endured the agonies of a hell that man himself created. Cigarettes, a twist of tobacco, Christmas pudding. These were the things that made the difference. That's what I recall of 1914.
I know where the flowers go in the winter time. Each year in September, up the wall they climb. Lay their eggs, then fly away. Come back on the 1st of May. Break their eggs, then oh what joy. First a little girl and then a little boy. Then they sing, we've traveled far, and sitting all the beaches down in Georgia. So now you know